Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Showcase for this month. We're doing a Stories of the Year draft. Looking forward to that. As always, I'm your host, Bret Rock, a sales manager here at SBS. Joining me today, I've got two of my teammates. Excited to have both of them back on. Lindsay Hull, our content strategist, is here to cover Marketing Corner with us one more time. Some goodies for the end of the year. Lindsay, you want to say hi?
Hey everyone, as Bret said, I'm Lindsay Hull, the content strategist here at SBS. I joined the marketing team back in October of 2024 and I bring a background in tourism and higher ed marketing.
Great. Thanks for being here again. Also, returning from last year's December Cyber Showcase, running back one of our most successful gimmicks of the year with me here again this year is John Helland, who's completed a full year on the sales team with me. So, John, you want to say hi?
Yeah. Good afternoon. Like Brett said, doing a year in sales here, and prior to that, coming from the IS consulting world and IT world. So excited to go through this again this year with Brett.
Great. Well, thank you guys both. So just quickly from an agenda perspective, you'll see all of our contact information there, as well as some flattering photos on the left-hand side. I'm confident that if you need anything from any of the three of us, you're welcome to ping us on with either of those contact methods there. The agenda, just quickly, we are going to start going through introductions, which we're working on. We'll talk a little bit about what's coming from SBS. Lindsay will handle that, as well as our marketing corner, talking about some of the blog posts we've got that correspond with today's topic. From there, John and I are going to jump right into our 2025 Cybersecurity Stories of the Year draft, and I'll lay out the rules. But before we get into that, we will also do some accountability here. We're going to talk about what our predictions were from last year. And then we'll wrap things up today by making some predictions for 2026 as well. So really excited to get into this with everybody. I think it's going to be a lot of fun and some good content. So with that said, for those of you who are not familiar with SBS, although I can't imagine there's too many on the call, if there are, welcome aboard. We appreciate you being here. Any of our current customers, we really appreciate working with you as always. SBS, we've been in the industry for over 20 years now, have about 100 employees now in over 25 states, all kinds of great different things that we do there, but we are very proud of the thing there at the bottom that we were ranked #1 this year for cybersecurity consulting by G2. That's a website that pulls together reviews from our customers, so we really appreciate that. All right, Lindsay, I'm going to click through for you, but I'll start you off with what's coming from SBS this month still.
Yeah, I'm excited to share what we have coming up from the education side. So we've got a few great learning opportunities on the calendar. Next week on December 16th, we have Nick Podorowski, joined by SBS's own Laura Zanucci on Hacker Hour, and they'll cover how to assess your vendor controls, data handling, and model transparency so your institution can stay secure and compliant in this age of AI.
Cool.
And then just after that, on December 17th, we have Cody Delzer going over the biggest cyber attacks of 2025, what we can learn from them, and how your organization can stay ahead into the new year. And that will be a really great natural conversation to follow up today's session.
Wonderful.
So be sure to check those out and get registered. And then since today's session is all about the biggest cybersecurity stories of the year, I wanted to share a few resources that really dig deeper into those trends that we'll be talking about and really help you think about how you can protect your own organization. So first up, we have the top 5 most common incident response scenarios. This blog goes through 5 of the most common threats, including phishing, malware, ransomware, internet-facing vulnerabilities, and business email compromise. And it also goes over how to protect against those, detect the early warning signs, and how to respond effectively. Then next, we have the Gen AI Security and Privacy Guide. This blog is a practical overview of what IT teams should know about today's most common generative AI tools and what to consider before rolling them out to your organization. Then we have When the Cloud Crashes, with some lessons from recent outages. So this piece looks back at the AWS and Azure outages from this fall, and it gives some actionable ways to strengthen your resilience as we just continue to be more dependent on the cloud. And then finally, we have a comprehensive guide to mitigating ransomware attacks. And this blog breaks down 6 of the most important controls to help you reduce the risk of a ransomware attack at your institution. And it includes data backups to security awareness training. So all 4 of these have some great insights and hopefully will give you some helpful context as you follow today's draft, and give you a few concrete steps to think about as we head into 2026. And also just want to say to keep an eye out. We'll be releasing some reflections and lessons from the Marquee breach that just occurred in the coming weeks. So keep a lookout for that. And I'll pass it back to you, Bret.
Great, Lindsay. Thank you. And you'd think I have been doing this for, I think, 2 to 3 years now, the Cyber Showcase. I would have figured some of this stuff out by now. Last month, Lindsay had to make sure I was showing my screen. I'd forgotten to do that. This month, I forgot to tell everybody that if you do want a copy of the slides or the recording of the webinar, there is a question on the survey at the very end. Feel free to either email me. My contact information will be back up at the end here. Or if you do take that survey, just answer yes on that one. And we'll be happy to get that to you so you can access all the great links that you see on the screen here that Lindsay's put together. Also, just taking that survey is very helpful for me. So think of it as an early Christmas gift if you don't mind. Okay, so with that said, hold on one second. With that said, let's jump into one other thing that I'm really excited about, what's here from SBS. Just last month, we released our newest module of Track, the Employee Access Review. This is a module that was created directly at the behest of our customers. We did a poll a few years back, and they voted this module, Employee Access Management, to be at the very top of the list of those that they were interested in. So if you are wanting to take a look at this module, please feel free to reach out. Visit our website. You can book a demo on there on the Track screen. Great module. We're really excited about it. And if you want to get rid of the spreadsheets that you're using to do all your employee access reviews, this will be very helpful in that purpose. So please feel free to reach out about that one as well. All right. So with that said, let's get into our 2025 Cybersecurity Stories of the Year draft. For those of you who are not insane sports fans like John and I, what we are going to do here, rather than just read off a list of the top stories we heard about in 2025, we thought we'd have some fun with it. We'd go back and forth. John's going to start. I'm a very benevolent host here, so I've given him the first selection in the draft. So what we'll do is he'll pick his top story, cybersecurity story of the year, give you a little background on it, some takeaways. We'll have a back and forth and maybe propose some solutions. And then we'll move on to the next one. Each of us have 3 selections, and then we're going to make a prediction at the end here. So very excited about that. But before we get into it, as I mentioned at the top, we want to have some accountability. We did this last year. We each had a prediction. John came up with a very, very specific prediction that I'm going to turn the floor over here. John, so where are we on your prediction of an intentional transition to passwordless authentication with the FIDO Alliance?
Right. So I was very, very big on this last year, and I actually am still very, very big on this, and the whole idea of tokens and not having to worry so much about passwords being cracked and multi-factor authentication being cracked as well. And so the use of tokens is really the probably the best way to avoid phishing and things like that. Still doesn't grab a lot of headlines because, as Bret mentioned, it is a very specific control. But if we do go out and look and do a Google search or talk with, ChatGPT or Copilot, I think what you'll find is there has been a significantly increased adoption in 2025 of passwordless authentication methods, which is fantastic news. Of course, we continue to use things like, as much conditional access as we can, packaged with multi-factor authentication. But I still stand by this. I wish it would grab more headlines, and I wish it would be everywhere. It's just not there. It's just a continued adoption. So good news, bad news. I think it's great that it's still being adopted. We're not there yet. I'm still a big supporter of this and want this to keep moving.
I think we're going to give you a check mark here and say that your prediction came true. I, on the other hand, went pretty broad and just said people are going to use AI. So I like to think I'm the big winner here, but AI and cybersecurity becomes even more prevalent for both good and bad. I think we absolutely saw that. I'm sure we're going to talk more about it as we're going through our draft here today. but I think the good and bad side of it has been really interesting to me. Did a demo, or I'm sorry, did one of these cyber showcases, I think in October when we were doing Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and made I guess the mistake of saying I thought the bad guys were going to be way far ahead of us on the AI side, and it does seem like we are staying close at least, and hopefully that will continue if we have good hygiene there. And won't talk any more about that because I think we'll get to it in the future. But I think John and I both get check marks for our predictions from last year. All right, John, with that said, with the first pick in this year's draft, what do you got here for us?
Well, I'm going to go real flashy and kind of the latest to hit the news, and I'm going to jump right into that marquee ransomware item. So, like it says here, the need for good vendor management. If you're not familiar, Marquee Software Solutions being a provider to many, many, many organizations, right, including over 700 banks and credit unions, experienced ransomware here just recently. So I think it was in August when they detected activity going on and maybe released information in, was it maybe October, at least starting with notifications. I think we're up to mid 70s in the amount of banks and credit unions that have been impacted. The number could climb. What is it, like 780,000 individuals being affected, and that's just on what we know today. So when we see these types of things going on, I think it's fair to say that we never know that full number for quite some time afterwards. So that number will likely continue to go up. So we look at that confidential information, and yes, it wasn't directly a financial institution. We're looking at a vendor that was touching a lot of financial institutions.
So before we get to some of the takeaways, John, and I know you want to talk about kind of why you think this is an important story, but I think one of the things that are at the bottom that I found pretty interesting about this one in particular is allegedly, again, I'm not directly involved with this, but one of the customers that was notified claimed that they had paid a ransom for getting their data back, or at least having it protected. What are your thoughts on that piece of it, the story?
Right, and again, it's allegedly. That's not been disclosed, I don't think, by Marquee. This is coming through maybe one of the organizations who was indirectly affected. So where that information came into play, not really certain yet, but you can imagine, depending on somebody's incident response and what's at stake and what their policies might be, you might get different responses in this type of situation. So certainly possible that they did pay a ransom to support that theory. I don't believe any hacker group has come out and claimed responsibility for this. And if a ransom hadn't been paid, it would be probable that a ransomware or an attacker group would come out and claim responsibility. Additionally, I don't think any of the stolen information has been published because data was leaked here. It wasn't just an encryption of files. They actually did exfiltrate the data. So the attackers do have the data, and they have the option to publicize things. And it sounds like to this point, at least I haven't seen anything today or yesterday that suggests anything's been published. So again, an indicator that maybe a ransom was paid, but we don't know that for sure at this point.
So we do have somebody in the chat that says that Marquee has recently claimed that they admitted, or maybe admitted is not the right word, but put it out there that they did pay a ransom. So there you go.
Very interesting to see how this all plays out. A big takeaway for me on this, from what I've read again, and this, I'm reading a few different articles out here. There is a remediation piece that has been shared saying that after the fact, here are the things that Marquee has put in place as a result of what happened. And a lot of people would look at those controls and things that have been put in place since and kind of question, a lot of us would have those controls in place a long time ago, right? And if our cyber hygiene was in good standing, this may not have happened. yes, it was a 0 day that was taken advantage by attackers, but getting a presence into a network is one thing, and then what you can do once you're in there is a whole nother thing. So you look at different levels of maturity in what we're doing from a cyber hygiene standpoint definitely makes a difference. And when we look at vendor management, these are some of the things that we're going to look at to ensure we're working with organizations who are taking care of that cyber hygiene to the level that we find acceptable.
Yeah, I think a story like this always reminds me kind of that second bullet, right? It's kind of even if an institution is doing or an organization is doing everything they should be doing and they have their right controls in place and we even probably do reasonably good vendor management, vendor incidents can still happen, right? And that can still cause a lot of legal, regulatory, reputational headaches for institutions and organizations that rely upon them.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is one we'll keep watching. I think there's more to come.
All right. And obviously, SBS, if you're ever interested, we do offer some solutions around vendor management assistance from track to full service, or our vendor management as a service offering. So lots of different organizations and companies that offer assistance with vendor management. And we'd be happy to talk to anybody that might be interested in that for sure. All right. So I guess I get the next pick here, and mine is going to be the Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act is temporarily lapses, and then is temporarily reauthorized. So just some background, I'm sure everybody's more familiar about this than I am even, but CISA was created in 2015, helps the government and industry share cybersecurity information and data back and forth. It provides liability protection. It allows financial services companies to really share data back and forth to make sure that we're staying on top of threats as best as we possibly can. And as it says right there, financial service companies have been among the most active users and beneficiaries of the protections created by CISA. On September 30th of this year, the CISA did officially expire. It was reauthorized on November 12th. And has a reauthorization temporarily until January 30th of 2026. And Homeland Security, the Department of Homeland Security there estimates that a loss of CISA, if it were to go away entirely, which doesn't sound like that's going to be the case, but if it were, would cause a drop in information sharing by as much as 80%. So for me, what's scary about this is one of those really critical controls to me is the ability to talk to one another and to share information back and forth and to make sure that we are aware of what's going on and as quick and as timely a fashion as possible. So, John, I may ask you this before I get to some of my takeaways here and maybe some potential solutions or some best practices to consider. Is there anything that struck you about this story or anything that causes you concern about this item?
Well, initially it was the lapse and thank goodness for the reauthorization or putting it back in place.
Right.
To me, it was terrifying the idea that from an information sharing perspective, it's such a huge resource, and I look at it at a smaller scale. If we're working in an organization, that information security training or that the publications of certain vulnerabilities and things like that, they're all trickling down from somewhere. And this is certainly a big resource for that. And just to not have that resource that's very trusted, that a lot of us will look to not have that available in such a fast moving environment is kind of wild. I had a hard time believing that when I saw that. Hopefully things continue going as long as it can. But I was just had a little shock there in the beginning. It's like, if we start losing guidance and direction from some of these big resources, that could really it could really show fast, I think.
Well, and I think you hit on the key point. The threats have never evolved faster, right? Things are changing so quickly. New threats are emerging so quickly. The idea that we're going to go a month or more and something potentially without this ability and the protections that it provides to share data, I think is really concerning in the environment that we're in now. So just some takeaways that I've jotted down here. Obviously, it has been temporarily reauthorized through the end of January, which is a good start. As I understand it, there is movement to reauthorize it longer term. They're looking at through the end of 2035, which I think would be hopefully a very good solution. Some tweaks to it potentially, from what I gather. But the possibility of it not being renewed, as we've discussed here, even for a short period of time, even to have the lapse that we had in September, or from October to November 12th, could be devastating, right? And we talk about reduced participation, slower intelligence flow at a time when these threats are exploding, and AI, as we'll talk about a little bit later on, is growing that threat pretty rapidly. I just can see this being pretty devastating in its impact. And potentially with some uncertainty around whether or not it's going to be reauthorized more long term. I imagine people on the call here on the webinar today are thinking we need to potentially lessen our dependency on those feeds and maybe start to rely more on our own cybersecurity maturity. So how do we make sure we're as well protected as we possibly can be? So I agree, John. This was my biggest story of the year. It wasn't, thankfully it wasn't a months long gap before it was reauthorized, but I think we'll all sleep better at night when it is reauthorized long term. And I don't know if you have anything else to add to that.
No, fully agree. I will sleep better.
There you go. All right, cool. Well, on to you with the third pick. What do you got?
So a lot of time this year, pre and post the sunset of the CAT tool, the cybersecurity assessment tool from the FFIEC. So I think that was first released in 2015. So it had a really nice 10-year run, and the announced retirement happening at the end of August this year, which it did happen, right? And so the big question, we had the beginning of the year to talk about, oh, this is coming, what are we going to do? And now that has passed. And so what are we doing is the conversation. Can we use it one last time, right? Can we get one more year out of it? And then the transition to another framework or source of guidance. So that to me was, it's been a year long, almost a 2-year long conversation. And so just kind of dominating a lot of the conversation throughout the year.
And I actually think last year's draft, one of us picked, and I'd have to go back and look, but I think one of us picked the one of our stories of the year was that the CAT was being sunsetted. So the fact that it actually happened, not that it was a shock by any stretch, but sometimes these things can get pushed back a little bit. And this, they said it was going away, or at least being sunsetted and no longer supported on August 31st. And that absolutely seems to have been the case. Let's do some takeaways, John. So kind of maybe what you're seeing in the industry and kind of what you're hearing from our customers as they're starting to transition a little bit.
Yeah, so there's a lot of transition going on, and at time of sunset, they FFIEC did say, hey, here's a list of suggested frameworks, right? But they're looking out and saying, let's go ahead and adopt some of the more widely used frameworks. So NIST Cybersecurity Framework 2.0 is a huge one. Maybe it's CIS controls. Maybe it's the Cyber Risk Institute's cyber profile. And I think I missed another. We go back to CISA. CISA's cybersecurity performance goals. That's another option. What I'm seeing a ton of is that NIST cybersecurity framework, but maybe even more so for the financial institutions here, looking really close at that Cyber Risk Institute, their cyber profile. So that again is built off of that NIST cybersecurity framework. So you're kind of getting best of both worlds in my mind. You're leveraging the big framework, and then you're really gearing it with questions and putting a focus on real world operations in the financial industry. So that's been a big fit, I think.
Yeah, I think one thing that's really critical here is just because the CAT goes away doesn't mean the expectation of measuring your maturity goes away, right? So it's kind of trying to figure out what the best solution is. And as you pointed out, there's a variety of different options that are out there. we as a company started working on obviously NIST CSF is a framework. It's not an assessment. So we took it and turned it into a track module starting at the end of last year and rolled it out, I think, in February timeframe. And I think for a long time, we were kind of under the impression, wow, this is going to be the answer. This is what everybody's going to use. Around April, we started to hear more and more about the CRI profile. And then I would say to date, and again, this is just our experience, but I would say upwards of 80% of the financial institutions that have signed up for one of those modules have signed up for CRI. And I imagine for the exact same reasons you've laid out, John, which is it is built more specifically for them, uses a lot of the same language and terminology that they're already familiar with. So, what is your sense, maybe as you're working with our customers and out in the industry a little bit, in terms of how long people can wait to make a decision? Do you have any feel for that?
So that's a good question. If I have a feel for it, I would say you want to make that change sooner than later, right? From a feedback perspective, what I've heard is examiners asking, where are you on this? Some, with the sunset happening, August 31st, finalized their assessment on August 30th, hoping to get as much life out of that as they could and give them the most time to make that adjustment and figure things out, because it does take time to figure that out. And so it's been a conversation then, if we're still moving off of the CAT, show me that you have a plan. What is your plan? Let's make decisions and, show that you are doing that transition. That's kind of what I'm seeing and hearing. If you haven't fully jumped in, that you are making plans to get that. It's so important to have a framework, right? Yeah. If we don't have a framework, we're really just running wild to some extent in terms of risk management. So, for your own good, I think it's a great idea to, evaluate and select one that fits you and lean on that framework.
And I think that's a critical part of this too, right? And in my experience so far, the examiners are kind of holding true to their word, which is we're not picking a framework. Now the cynic may say, yeah, you said you weren't going to pick a framework the last time, but you picked CAT, and that kind of became quote unquote mandatory, or air quotes mandatory. But I will say that everything I've heard is they're saying pick a framework that works for you, that you're happy with, that you want to follow, that you're going to jump in with both feet and you're going to follow going forward and use to get better. I think that has been every conversation I've had has kind of gone in that direction, which I think is a good thing, having the ability to pick and choose one that makes the most sense for you. But I kind of also follow in line with what you're saying, which is, if you haven't completed something new yet, at least have a decision on what you're going to do. I think that's when I hear people say we've gone through an audit recently or an exam recently, the question that they're getting isn't necessarily, have you finished a new framework? It's what are you going to use going forward? So if you haven't already made a decision, I would certainly start thinking about doing so. As we mentioned, we do have two brand new modules of, well, not brand new, two new modules of track, one for the NIST CSF and one for CRI profile we'd be happy to talk about. But John, as you pointed out, there's other frameworks that are available as well. And again, we would just encourage you to pick the one that makes the most sense for you guys. We'll see. I don't think the CAT's going to make a third year for next year's, for the 2026 cybersecurity draft, but not a bad start being in 2024 and 25. All right, so moving on with the fourth pick for me, getting a little bit outside of our typical area of expertise. Obviously, we have a lot of customers that are in the financial services space. We continue to grow there as well as outside of it. I'm going to go with CMMC enforcement goes live. So for those of you who are not familiar, CMMC is the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. It was originally introduced in 2019 as a mechanism to protect against the leak of what's called CUI, or controlled unclassified information. And really who this applies to at this point is any organization that's looking for a DoD contract or has worked with the, previously held a DoD contract at some point. So in the past, up until 2019, they were seeing a lot of leak of that information from their vendors, from their subcontractors, things like that. Back then, it was more of a self-attestation. It was more of a self-assessment. Hey, we swear we're doing everything right. And they kind of said, okay, we believe you. And bad things kept happening. And eventually in 2019, the CMMC was created. The proposed rule for CMMC 2.0 was introduced in December of 2023. The final rule became effective earlier this month. I'm sorry, the final rule became effective in 2024, rather, and phased implementation and enforcement began in November of this year. So 2023 is when it was introduced. Final rule was 2024. And now we're finally starting to see some of the implementation and enforcement. And I think one of the really critical things here is that it's going to force anybody seeking a DoD contract to meet the required standards of NIST 800-171 before the award of the contract. So it's not going to be something where we say, oh, great, we won the contract. Now we can go ahead and meet those standards. It is going to be something that you have to be able to attest to or certify truthfully that you are meeting those standards ahead of time. The enforcement also includes legal risk if you are not truthful about your status. And then it also ensures not only that the contractor or the vendor is compliant, but also their subcontractors as well. So lots of things go into this. Again, it's not necessarily if you're a financial institution, we'll talk about some of the indirect effects that this may have. I do want to talk a little bit more about it long-term when I get to takeaways in a minute. But John, I know that, again, we're kind of dipping our toes in the water of CMMC as a company and starting to talk to other organizations that may need to become compliant in the near future. Anything that stands out about CMMC that you would want to add?
Well, the big thing I run into in the past year or two is I've worked with a few organizations who have been working on gearing up for this. And for several, it's the driver here is the customers are coming to them and saying, hey, we want to do business with you, but
right,
we're going to need this, right? And so if you're in a position where you don't necessarily know where you stand or this is going to be a thing, the very first step is start documenting everything. So whether it's meeting minutes and formal approvals of documentation and assessments and all of these things, the sooner you start documenting and having good records, the sooner you're going to be able to move forward with anything related here. So that's to me, that's challenge number one, is just beginning really strong documentation to get started. Because again, I think Bret commented on the being more than an attestation. And there's going to be we're going to be very, very truthful, but we're going to need to show with documentation that we are doing X, Y, Z. So that's my big takeaway, just as a baby step forward, is anything you have going, documentation and formal approvals and things like that.
And again, I wouldn't say we've come into a majority of customers that are looking to become CMMC compliant, although I think that's going to pick up as this rule and the implementation and enforcement starts to roll out. But what I will say I've heard from a couple of them is the things we do, we would have never guessed in a million years we would need to have a full incident response program or a third-party audit for. We do canvas for the outside of tents or something like that, and it's like, yeah, that you have a DoD contract or you are going after a DoD contract, there's going to be some element of requirements that you're going to have to face or be able to meet before the award of the contract. Again, not after the fact. So again, I think it's a very interesting thing to monitor. And as a takeaway perspective for obviously for any organizations that are interested in pursuing DoD contracts, as John, as you mentioned, now is the time to start determining which level you fall in, but also what is expected of you. Most organizations, from what I gather, it's a level 1 would be kind of the lowest level of kind of requirements. Level 2, level 3 is when we start to get into more significant requirements, including a third-party audit potentially. But if you are looking for to be a level 2 or 3 organization, you're going to have to really start thinking about how you're going to get there, whether it's risk assessments or documenting your program or third-party audits or bringing in additional expertise, right? Can we have somebody that's got a background and information in cybersecurity come in and help us those are the things you really need to start thinking about. And then, again, in the short term, an impact to a financial institution is probably going to be pretty indirect or negligible, as I put on the slide here. But every time I see new compliance come out, every time I see new regulation or new guide, whatever it might be, anything that new comes out that's new, I always kind of have my eye on it, because you never know what this could lead to in the future from a change perspective. Could we see a financial version of the CMMC requirements and more of a leveled approach in terms of what you need to be doing? So, John, I don't know if you have any, obviously that won't be your prediction. You've already got one that we've logged here, but any thoughts from you about what you could see this looking like in the future?
Well, you mentioned risk assessment in here, and I know, again, I'm going to get really focused on a control, right? Like I did in last year's prediction. But you mentioned risk assessment, and we're talking about a lot of things coming in the future. And when we're looking at being able to meet certain criteria and things like that, a huge risk that I see and that I think everybody will see right away is AI. How are we using AI? And so I'm thinking in the future, as we're working through risk assessments and things like that, I'm thinking making sure that you're including AI in your risk assessment, as you work through these things. Kind of trying to be forward thinking here as this develops, but certainly something that could be overlooked. But I think people are going to start asking, how are you managing AI in your organization? Again, it's a vendor management thing. It's maybe a contract thing. You need to meet these certain criteria in order to do business with me. How are you managing AI? I think it's going to be a question that we're all going to ask each other.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the things that the takeaways with CMMC and kind of what they're requiring DoD contractees to look into are things that we're probably already doing as a financial institution in a lot of ways. But I could see some reshuffling of the decks if this goes as I think the government thinks it's going to go. So again, short-term impacts, if you're a financial institution, probably not a lot there, but I do think it's something to keep an eye on, because you never know what the future is going to hold with that sort of thing. So, all right, let's go to the fifth pick. John, you are back up on the clock here.
Well, my mind was just going AI, so I'm going to just kind of keep going that direction. And I'd say for 2025, we're not talking about when AI comes anymore, where it's here, we're using it, people are adopting it, we're fully in that mode of what else can I do, where else can we implement it, what can it do for me? So yeah, AI is very much here. In 2025 has been AI, continues to be, and it just keeps accelerating. What does this say here? 47% of banks have already deployed generative AI apps, moving from a nice to have to a must have for financial institutions. That's really a big thing. I think, we see a lot of organizations talking about AI, and I have certainly talked to a lot of people who are saying it's okay because we're not using it. We're not going to use it. We're going to, risk avoidance if we can, right? But also we might challenge. We have a lot of banks that say we aren't using it. We want to, but we don't even know how to get. It's just overwhelming. It's so big, and so we have. I think it's just kind of all over the place, but it's definitely moving, right? So people are training on Copilot prompting right now. People are doing risk assessments on AI. People are implementing AI, and it doesn't have to be. In fact, I would challenge, if you say you're not using AI, I would lean into that a little bit more and say, are you sure? Because I'm pretty sure a good handful of your vendors are using AI. And so if you're working with your vendors and they're using AI, you're probably using it in some capacity. And remember how it is at your fingertips for all of your staff usually. So you may be doing a really good job maybe blocking things or making them unavailable, but consider how much it's built into your Office apps. The majority of the tools that we're using there are features there available at the fingertips for the majority of your staff to use today. So we may not,
Yeah, it's here. I think is the big takeaway for sure. And we'll talk about takeaways in a second. I think I announced on a cyber showcase maybe 2 months ago, we've begun rolling out what we're calling our virtual chief artificial intelligence officer engagement, which is not the world's greatest name. We're working on it. But in those conversations that I've been a part of, and John, I'm sure you're hearing a lot of the same thing. You kind of touched on it a minute ago, actually, is I see organizations and institutions kind of falling in one of three buckets. The first one is we're putting our head in the sand. We're not going to do this. We don't want to touch it. But we also recognize that our vendors are doing it. We also recognize that our team is probably doing it, whether or not we allow them to. And so that's kind of the first one. The second one would be we're dipping our toe in the water. We're interested. Maybe we're getting some pressure from the C-level or board or whatever the case may be, customers even. So we are starting to kind of ease into it a little bit. And then the third bucket, and we don't have a ton of these, but we've got enough of them that are just kind of running through a brick wall to get AI. I think the middle bucket is the one that I think is probably the best position right now. Certainly anybody who sticks their head in the sand and says we're not going to do that, I completely understand that from a risk perspective. But John, as you've kind of illuminated, that also means you're not gaining any of the benefits of it either. And it doesn't take us going too far back in time to remember when people were saying we're not going to do online banking. There's no way I'm letting somebody bank on a computer. And if you had said that in the past and you got 6 months behind somebody else that was doing it, or a year behind somebody else that was doing it, obviously that could be a big problem from a competitive edge perspective. So that's that position. And the people that are kind of like, we're going to do it at all costs, we want to get there as fast as we possibly can, I certainly understand that perspective, but there are risks. We don't want to minimize that. We're big proponents of AI, and we think there's a lot of benefits. We've been using it internally for a long time. But there is an element of you need to account for the risks that are out there, and you need to have the right policies and procedures in place. You have to do a risk assessment. We talk about risk assessment in the last drafted item. I think that fits in here really well as well. A lot of institutions and organizations that I've talked to just have no idea what they've got that has AI. And so I don't know, John, if that relates to any of the conversations that you've been having at all.
Well, 100%. I've talked to organizations who come to realize we've had access to Copilot for a year and a half, and nobody's touching it, right? Some things that I've heard and that I would suggest that I really like from people have, there's a lot of myths and a lot of scary things around AI. So as it applies to you, I'd work on debunking those myths. Find out what's real and what's not for you, right? What's not true and what is true for your situation. So whatever those concerns are, find out if they're real concerns or not. And then AI it's a tool and a methodology, just like anything else. So use risk assessment to make decisions. Risk assess it. You're going to want to govern AI, and you're going to want to monitor it, just like anything else that we're doing. So if we can kind of take what's really overwhelming and simplify that. And then just remember, like, AI is so broad, right? So we can talk about chatbots, which seem like that's a huge project and overwhelming. But you can dumb it down and just say, let's just talk about the ability to compare two documents and analyze those in 2 minutes versus taking 2 hours to manually compare two documents and come up with whatever your answer is, right? So if I'm doing something for me and I'm comparing these documents and I spend 2 hours a week doing this procedure, for me, it might make sense to use AI just for that one task, because it's going to save me about an hour and a half, 2 hours every week. Mm-hmm. And if you can identify something like that for each person in your organization, the amount of efficiency and potentially time saved is great. Now, Bret might not ever do that procedure. He may not do any comparing of documents ever. And so maybe that doesn't apply to him. So Bret doesn't need to be trained on comparing documents, right? So each person in their role, they might use AI for different things, right? You don't have to know them all. Let's take what's overwhelming and really simplify it.
Yeah, I one of the big takeaways I had, and this a direct quote from somebody I was talking to on a call recently about that program I mentioned, the VCAIO. They said that the AI feels like the ocean. It's like they're staring out at the ocean. They have no idea where it starts, no idea where it ends. They don't even know where to, what to do. And I think what we recommend, and you'll probably see this elsewhere, is the idea of narrowing that focus down. How do you find one or two projects per department that we could take and use AI to automate, or maybe we automate a piece of it. It's not even the whole project, but John, to your point, we're able to take document review and we're able to summarize them and save us time and energy. We talk a lot about low hanging fruit, right? What is the high reward, low risk stuff we can do? Where, to your point, I can gain an hour back of my day. What does that look like at the end of the week? What does that look like at the end of the month for everybody across our organization? So, whether it's something as simple, John, you mentioned document reviews and kind of comparing to, I think that's a great use case. One of my favorite ones is just at the end of the day, I'll type into Copilot, hey, tell me any emails I've yet to respond to, or anybody that's waiting on an email response from me. And it'll pull it up, tell me these two people, I can ping them, get them off my plate and move on. So again, it can be overwhelming. Totally understand that. There's lots of different use cases that are out there, but finding the ones that are going to make the most impact and require the least risk and can get done the fastest, and then you can move on to some of the bigger ones. I think is a really, really smart idea that you bring up. And we say this at the bottom here. I think how to implement AI safely was a hot topic in 2025. I truly believe it is going to be the hot topic in 2026. I think this is going to be something we're going to be talking a lot about. And we're excited about that prospect. And I'm excited for everybody that's out there that is starting to dip their toe in the water. So, John, anything to wrap up on AI before we move to the final pick in our draft here?
I think we got it.
Perfect. All right. And I kind of cheated on my last pick. I lumped a bunch of stories together here, but I think it's kind of an important concept to think about. And it's that the impacts from failures of critical infrastructure really, to me, began being felt more acutely in 2025. And that's not to say that they weren't before. I don't want to make it sound like there was never a story in 23 or 24 that obviously people felt pain from. That's certainly not the case. But it does seem like some of these bigger threats, these bigger stories are starting to emerge this year and really causing a lot of pain. And I listed some of them here. A September ransomware attack on Collins Aerospace allowed bad guys to shut down the automated check-in systems at airports across Europe, caused a lot of flight delays and cancellations. People couldn't check bags, they couldn't check in, they couldn't, they had to revert back to doing paper check-in and paper tickets and things like that. That is a nightmare that I do not want to have in my life if I can help it. I didn't even know about this one, John, and it speaks to maybe how closely I follow cybersecurity, but a ransomware attack in July of this year forced St. Paul, Minnesota to shut down all of its information systems that closed core city services, including phone service, bill payments online, public Wi-Fi. The National Guard came in. Eventually, the city did not pay the ransom, so bad guys posted 43 gigs of city data after that. The next one down there on the list, I know it's a Norwegian dam, so it's a little further away, but that one to me is terrifying. Russian hackers took control of a Norwegian dam for more than 4 hours, and it was just dumping, 135 millions of gallons of water for 4 straight hours. Just kind of illuminating the threats that to our energy grid and infrastructure globally. And then the last one's not a cyber attack, right? Lindsay actually had a great blog post we posted about this, so I encourage you to take a look at that. But Azure and AWS were hit with major outages in October and really disrupted consumer applications, enterprise software, and other services for hours and hours and hours. I think the AWS one was 15 plus hours. Incidentally, the Azure one, I kind of experienced that one live. I was doing a track demo. Went to pull up reports. They wouldn't come. And I kept thinking, man, track's been really slow today. Eventually had to cancel the demo mid-demo, apologize. And then I found out that Azure was down and had taken track with it. So again, that's not even necessarily it's not a cyber attack. That's just a configuration error and things like that. So, there's all kinds of stories that are out there. I just think we're really starting to see how fragile some of this can possibly be. And John, I don't know if you have anything you want to comment on any of those stories or any others that you may have come up with.
Well, like you mentioned, some of these are not Azure and AWS. A couple of years ago, wasn't it CrowdStrike that had the big outage that just the amount of people using that tool or product, um, when we get so saturated into one product or service, and that thing has a problem, the impact is huge, and the same there with Azure and AWS. So yeah, it's not always cyber in the way that we think of an attack, but the amount of dependency we have on these things now is something we need to keep in mind as we're building out DR systems, and when we're thinking about risk and availability, things do go wrong.
Yep. So just some takeaways from this one. Again, while none of the incidents were completely catastrophic, they all, to me, signal kind of the same thing, that some of our worst fears about cyber attacks and vulnerable infrastructure, I think they're starting to come true to some degree. They always probably have been, but it did seem like there were a lot more of them in the news this year. I thought this one was interesting, kind of the concept of attackers, kind of quietly shifting from stealing information or locking down information to really maximizing, the impact they can have, that knowing that downtime and the operational disruption and the public pressure can really be pretty devastating. I think maybe the marquee one is a good example. They chose to pay the ransom, right? It was something where they felt that was the best path forward for them. John, do you have a feel for, or kind of any thoughts on how the attacks and the perpetrators are kind of changing their approach because of how bad this stuff can possibly be?
Well, there's a lot of responses there. I think, I look at the evolution of ransomware, I guess, right? So when we started, it was file encryption only, and then it was exfiltrate, encrypting the files, but also exfiltrating a copy of them, and so a lot of this stuff is about, when we talk about ransom, it's about leverage. So what can I do? So it could be an availability thing, right? We could talk about, maybe they have gained access to the on-off switch, and the threat is, I can shut this down, and just creativity and the higher the impact, or the ability to have impact, can impact the amount of ransom they're asking for, and just a lot to think about.
Yeah, and I think that might lead into your prediction coming up a little bit too, some of the additional impacts there. So I won't press you too much more on that one. But the last part there is kind of obviously, at the same time, cloud and technology providers, they're very resilient, but they're not infallible. And even the smallest configuration mistakes, the smallest vulnerabilities, zero-day stuff, can lead to obviously significant downtime. So what I think this speaks to is just being, continuing the mindset that this is important. We need to make sure that we're handling cybersecurity the right way. We need to have a good disaster recovery plan, a good incident response plan. We need to test it. We need to make sure that we're filling in any gaps. When we're doing vendor management, we got to make sure that we understand what vulnerabilities they may have and how we're going to handle those. And again, I think all the stories that I kind of wrapped up into this last draft pick for myself was really built upon the idea of having a good cybersecurity culture, taking it seriously, not just doing it to check a box, but to do it because we know that it's important. And at the end of the day, we're kind of all we're all technology companies, kind of whether we like it or not. That's a big saying for our president, John Waldman. He always talks about, everybody's a technology company. And if you kind of don't believe it, turn off your technology, right? You'll be doing bag checks by hand or check-ins by hand. So again, I just thought all those stories kind of looped into that concept pretty nicely. All right, so as we're starting to wrap up, as I promised, we're each going to do one more prediction. Next year, when we get back together or reconvene to do this, we'll hold ourselves accountable here. John, I'm going to turn it over to you here. What is your 2026 prediction?
Yeah, I think a lot of us are still, we've talked a lot about AI today, and I'm just going to keep that momentum. AI, I'm going to be a little bit ominous here and just be wary of the idea that it is moving so fast and so quickly. And On our end, we're not as quick. So it is the same cycle. Attackers have a new method or a new type of attack, or they've discovered a 0-day vulnerability. And then we have to come back and create the response to it, the fix to it. And then they find, the next step to attack. And then we address that, right? And it's just this never ending cycle. I see that it's just spinning a lot faster with AI. I think the attackers have the advantage of being as creative and as fast as they want, while we need to be a little bit more cautious with risk assessment and doing things more methodically. So I do feel like that gives the attackers the upper hand. So I'm a little bit wary about what the future could look like. So, as long as we continue to use risk assessment and make decisions based on risk, we'll probably be just fine. But things are moving fast and advantage bad guys, I think.
So what role do you think? I always think about AI and kind of, I do agree with you, although I've gotten in many conversations where people are glass half full and think that the AI on the good side of the fence is going to keep up or help us keep up a lot faster than we've done in the past, which I think is completely conceivable. But what element or how big of an element do you think security awareness training in particular plays with something like AI on the bad guy side of the house and being able to detect some of the things that they're coming up with?
Yeah, I think it's going to be huge, right? I mean, let's look at cloning people's voices and using those, the deep fakes, whether it's voice or video. If we aren't aware of those types of things, we're going to likely be tricked, right? So an awareness of what the capabilities are out there and remembering to stick to our guns and follow our processes and make sure we're, doing these steps because we know it prevents these bad things from happening, right? Follow these procedures for a reason. So awareness is huge. And that, earlier when we talked about the possibility of losing one of those resources from information sharing, that falls right in line here. It's just like, wow, if we aren't getting that type of information, that sharing, how are we going to promote awareness? And yeah.
Well, for all of our sakes, we'll hope that your 2026 prediction is wrong. I fear that it's not. When we get back together, you can claim victory, but we'll see how that one goes. So thank you for doing that, John. Mine, and I think this goes in line with the pick I had toward the end there. I think measuring cyber resilience will become as important, if not more important, than just measuring cyber maturity. So we've spent a long time, I feel like, especially in the financial services industry, really talking about what does our maturity look like? The CAT, right? Another thing we talked about today. How are we measuring our cyber maturity? What does that look like? But cyber resilience, on the other hand, I don't know that we've always done a great job measuring that. How effective are we going to be when something does happen? Because as I kind of highlighted in that last draft pick I had there, I do feel like this is coming. And I think, John, your prediction falls right in line with this as well, right? It's, we've always kind of said it's not if, it's when, but it really feels more and more true by the day. I don't think anybody, it'd be great if we get to the end of the, 2026 and there are people that get to raise their hands and say, we never even had a threat, let alone some sort of breach or event or something we had to deal with. I think being able to measure that resilience and be able to understand how effective we are at mitigating the risk, certainly, but also recovering, responding, all those sorts of things is just as important, if not more important. So, John, I don't know if you have any thoughts. Again, I think that ties in pretty neatly with what you talked about to some degree as well.
Yeah, and I love your prediction. And to me, like what I see a lot of people doing that aligns with that would be expanding from just doing typical scans on our network for certain things is actually testing the investments we've made, right? So if we've invested in this huge endpoint detection and response system, how can we evaluate that to make sure it is actually doing what we're expecting it to do in the time we expect it to do it, and engagements like that? So let's find out are these big tools we put in place effective, and to what degree is it effective? And you think about things like purple team testing for stuff like that, where we can really tune those tools to be really valuable. Or you go further and instead of just doing scans, we're going to do a red team assessment, and we're going to have an organization come in and really find out, are our tools and our procedures and processes that we have in place today, do they work? Are people doing the things we've asked them to do? Are our technology investments working? And those types of assessments. So I love it.
Well, this was a lot of fun, John, at least for me. Hopefully the survey results reflect that. This is always great to talk to you. I think you bring a different quality to the sales team, having the mindset that you've had previous to this. So it's always a fun time talking about the year that has been. I'm going to put our contact information back up here. If you guys don't mind taking that survey at the end there, including, I'd be happy to send you the slide deck and the recording of the session. From my absolute bottom of my heart, I do want to thank everybody who sat through all the cyber cases this year, or as many as you sat through. It's been a fun year. It's been a lot of great hot topics that we've covered, a lot of great things that SBS has brought to the table that we were able to introduce on this monthly webinar. And I hope that you will stick with me again in 2026. We've got a big one to kick off the year. It's our annual State of the State with Track. So we'll be talking a lot in January about what we did with Track in 2025, what we're planning on doing with Track in 2026. So I hope you'll register for that one as well. And with that said, really appreciate it again, everybody. Have a great holiday season, and we will talk to you in the future. So I'm going to stick around, see if anybody has any questions. We'll try to answer those. If we need to follow up with you directly, we will. But otherwise, I hope you have a great day.